We want the museums to talk about the history of our country in a fair manner, not in a woke manner or in a racist manner, which is what many of them, not all of them, but many of them are doing.
In the closing days of summer 2025, Washington was rocked by an announcement that sounded less like democratic policy and more like the playbook of an authoritarian regime. Donald Trump's White House revealed that the Smithsonian Institution, America's vast complex of 21 museums and galleries, was being ordered to undergo a full review of all its exhibits. The terms were brutal. Within 120 days, every single display had to be reassessed and rewritten to align with the administration's vision of a unified, patriotic, and exceptional American history. The order wasn't a friendly suggestion. It was a mandate tied to the Smithsonian's federal funding, the lifeline of its operations. The message was unmistakable: comply or risk being defunded. For curators, historians, and archivists, the order posed a chilling dilemma. Do they preserve their integrity, knowing it could cost them their jobs and resources? Or do they bend to political pressure and sanitize history itself? The Trump administration presented the move as a campaign to end divisiveness in the way America remembers its past. Officials argued that exhibits dwelling on slavery, Jim Crow, civil rights struggles, or U.S. military abuses abroad instilled shame rather than pride. Instead, they insisted museums should highlight triumphs and victories, framing America as an unparalleled force for good. To the administration, this was not censorship, it was restoring balance. But critics across the nation and the world saw something far darker. By branding uncomfortable facts as divisive, the White House was attempting to turn historical truth into propaganda. This was not balance being restored. This was memory being erased. Why the Smithsonian matters. The Smithsonian is not just a collection of artifacts, it is America's memory bank. Its exhibits shape how millions of visitors, both domestic and international, understand the nation's past. From the iron shackles that restrained enslaved Africans during the Middle Passage, to the original lunch counter where civil rights activists staged sit-ins, to archives documenting U.S. interventions overseas, the Smithsonian reflects both America's triumphs and its darkest truths. Force, a political rewrite of that story, is to distort not only national identity but also global perceptions of the United States. Because unlike smaller museums, the Smithsonian's reach is immense. Its exhibitions travel abroad, its research influences school curricula, and its curatorial decisions often set the standard for institutions worldwide. If those exhibits are reshaped to emphasize only American exceptionalism, slavery could be reduced to a challenge overcome, segregation retold as a brief obstacle to unity, and U.S. wars abroad reframed as noble missions. The effect would ripple across the world, sanitizing the image of America while silencing the struggles of its marginalized communities. Enter PragerU. The controversy intensified when the Trump administration endorsed PragerU as an educational partner in this effort. PragerU, known for its slick, short conservative videos, has long been criticized for oversimplification, distortion, and outright revisionism. Yet its materials are already approved in classrooms across 10 U.S. states. Now, pairing a politically compromised Smithsonian with a propaganda-driven media outlet threatens to create a closed ecosystem of controlled memory. Students would first learn an edited version of history in schools, then encounter that same narrative reinforced in America's most prestigious museums. Over time, fiction would harden into fact, and fact would be dismissed as bias. Historians across the country have called this the most dangerous political intervention in U.S. cultural life in decades. Civil rights groups warn it is a direct assault on Black memory, echoing America's long tradition of silencing oppressed communities. Internationally, the parallels are hard to ignore. Fascist regimes in Europe and colonial powers in Africa similarly rewrote history to glorify themselves while erasing the voices of the oppressed. The voice of Annette Gordon-Reed in the midst of the uproar, one voice has stood out with clarity and force. Annette Gordon-Reed, Pulitzer Prize-winning Harvard historian, professor of law and history, and current president of the Organization of American Historians. Gordon-Reed has spent her career exposing sanitized narratives of America's past, particularly around slavery and race. Her groundbreaking book, The Hemingses of Monticello, uncovered the hidden lives of Thomas Jefferson's enslaved family, peeling away the myth of America's founders to reveal the human cost of their hypocrisy. So when she spoke out against Trump's Smithsonian directive, her words carried weight far beyond academia. She warned, "The Smithsonian was created as an independent institution, guided by research and evidence, not by the political visions of whoever sits in the White House. To demand that it reflect the administration's narrative is more than problematic. It's a direct attack on democratic memory. Gordon-Reed didn't mince words. She described the directive as an attempt to whitewash history under the pretense of making white children feel more comfortable. But shielding children from truth, she argued, is not protection, it is theft. History as a weapon. Young people already know they are not personally responsible for slavery or segregation. But without historical context, they cannot understand why inequality persists today. To remove that context is to deprive them of the tools to dismantle injustice. By reframing slavery as a closed chapter or civil rights as a simple tale of unity, the administration hopes to erase the roots of systemic inequality. In Gordon-Reed's words, the project isn't about fostering unity, it's about silencing voices of struggle and rewriting oppression into obedience. She also zeroed in on the dangerous synergy between a compromised Smithsonian and PragerU's influence in classrooms. Together, they create a loop of false memory. Distorted lessons in school, reinforced in museum halls, echoed in political discourse. Over time, generations could grow up believing myths as reality, never realizing what truths have been erased. Colonial parallels. This controversy does not exist in a vacuum. The rewriting of history is a tactic as old as empire. France long portrayed colonization as a civilizing mission, conveniently omitting massacres like the slaughter of Algerians in Sétif in 1945. British textbooks celebrated railways and schools in the colonies, while erasing famines in India and the brutality of the Mau Mau rebellion in Kenya. Belgium went further, recasting King Leopold II as a humanitarian despite the millions who died in the Congo Free State. This was not ignorance. It was propaganda, designed to absolve colonial powers of guilt while suppressing demands for justice. Trump's Smithsonian order follows that same colonial logic. By demanding American exceptionalism as the filter through which all history must pass, it elevates myth over reality. When slavery is softened, the transatlantic horrors that devastated Africa are diminished. When segregation is reframed, systemic racism today is dismissed. When U.S. interventions abroad are erased, the destabilization of African nations vanishes from memory. The outcome is the same as colonial erasure. Those who suffered are silenced, and those who inflicted suffering are absolved. Memory, power, and accountability. Why does this matter so profoundly? Because history is not just about the past, it shapes the future. Colonial erasure justified ongoing economic exploitation. If no crimes were admitted, then no reparations were owed. In the same way, sanitizing slavery and segregation today undermines calls for justice. If slavery is portrayed as a resolved challenge, America has no responsibility to address the racial wealth gap. If colonization is recast as development, Africa's demands for reparations lose legitimacy. This is why Gordon-Reed insists the fight over the Smithsonian is not a mere culture war. It is a battle over power itself. Whoever controls the Smithsonian controls the national story, and by extension, shapes how future generations will understand race, empire, and justice. A Pan-African warning for Africa and the diaspora. The Smithsonian controversy carries global significance. For centuries, Western institutions have rewritten African history to serve their own power. They erased the grandeur of empires like Mali and Songhai, dismissed Great Zimbabwe as the work of outsiders, and silenced the legacy of African innovation and resistance. If America now erases its own crimes, it reinforces the same system that has long erased Africa's. What disappears in Washington will echo across the diaspora. What is softened in American textbooks will ripple into African classrooms. That is why Gordon-Reed's warning resonates as a Pan-African call to vigilance. Africans cannot leave their history in the hands of institutions that serve Western power. From local archives in Bamako to oral traditions kept by griots, to digital history projects in Lagos, the preservation of truth is a struggle for liberation. The Smithsonian Review is not only an American issue, it is a global alarm bell. If the most prestigious museum system in the United States can be turned into an arm of political propaganda, no cultural institution is safe. The stakes of memory at its core, this struggle is about dignity. To tell history truthfully is to affirm the humanity of those who suffered and resisted. To erase or sanitize history is to wound them again, to rob descendants of their rightful inheritance of truth. Memory is power. It shapes how nations see themselves, how they treat others, and how future generations imagine justice. If truth is replaced with myth, inequality becomes natural, oppression becomes invisible, and accountability disappears. Annette Gordon-Reed has sounded the alarm. The question now is whether we will listen. Because if history can be rewritten so easily in America, the world must ask, what happens to Africa's story, to Black memory, to the truth of colonialism and slavery? Will these two be reshaped by Western hands into palatable myths? Or will Africans and the diaspora seize this moment to guard the integrity of memory and, through it, the freedom of the future? The stakes could not be higher. The Smithsonian may be under siege today, but what falls in Washington will echo across the globe tomorrow.